Shalom, family. This is Brother Elia, and today we'll be discussing the origins of the European nations. Now, I've heard a lot of crazy explanations as to where the Europeans come from. Man, I've heard everything from space aliens to Horites to Neanderthals and, of course, Esau. I want to offer some actual biblical evidence on the origins of the European nations for your consideration. And as always, I want to encourage you to study the word for yourself rather than blindly following the teachings of anyone, myself included. See, it's not enough to throw out random Bible verses in support of a doctrine. You must rightly divide the word of truth. I endeavor to practice proper exegesis of biblical text, and you should too. Without further ado, let's get to work. We'll begin our discussion with a rather bold assertion from Smith's Bible Dictionary, which states that Japheth is the progenitor of the European nations. Is this actually true? Well, let's see if the Hebrew scriptures back this claim. Let's start by looking at the single mention of the Greeks in the Old Testament canon. We know that the Greeks are mentioned in great detail in the book of Maccabees, which is part of the Apocrypha, but they are not mentioned in the Old Testament canon outside of Joel chapter 3 and verse 6. The importance of this will be made clear in just a moment. I've posted this verse in context for the benefit of those who may be unfamiliar with it. This is about the judgment of the nations for the scattering of true Israel and the sundering of the Holy Land. You will see that the true Yehudim were sold to the Grecians in verse 6 of this chapter. Now, this again is the only instance where the term Grecian is used in the canonical Old Testament. This is a good thing because we can break down the word in Hebrew to come to an important understanding regarding the biblical lineage of the Greeks. The word translated to Grecians in the King James Version is in Hebrew, Yavani. In other words, Javan. You see here that the Greeks are descendants of Javan by definition. Now, who is Javan? Well, let's go to the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10 to find out. Genesis chapter 10, verses 1 through 5. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tiras. Skip down to verse 4. And the sons of Javan, Elisha, and Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. So it's abundantly clear that the Greeks, who are European, descend from Japheth according to the scriptures. I want to point out something very important regarding languages here. You see, Greek belongs to the Indo-European language family. This is significant because a number of other Japhetic nations also belong to the same linguistic family, which is another proof that they are related peoples. I'll tie this in just a bit. For now, let's move on to discuss another Japhetic lineage which is relevant to our discussion. That's the Persians. Now let's see what the scriptures say. The Persians, also called Medes in scripture, are descendants of Madai, according to the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10 and verse 2. Now let's see what the Zondervan scholars have to say about them. Madai, Medea, a people descended from Japheth, according to Genesis 10 verse 2, as well as 1 Chronicles chapter 1 and verse 5. They occupied the same area which modern Iran does today and were called the Medes. The modern day Iranians are the descendants of the Persians who were actually merciful toward our people in times past. Remember, it was the Medes who freed us from Babylonian captivity, sent a number of our people back to Jerusalem with gold and silver to rebuild the temple, and raised us to prominence due to the humility and service of Queen Esther and Uncle Mordecai. Esther is also known as Hadassah for you Hebrew scholars out there. This is how they look, by the way, the Persians. Here is a picture of Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, Persians are not a far cry from the Greeks in appearance, partly due to the intermixing which occurred during the age of Hellenism brought about by Alexander the Great, but also because they too are Japhethites, that is to say, Indo-Europeans. You see, Persians speak a language called Farsi, which, like Greek, also belongs to the Indo-European language family. I hope you're starting to connect the dots and see a picture here. These folks are related. Again, biblically, these are the Medes, the children of Madai, Japhethites, just like the Greeks. Now let's move on to discuss the Gomerites. Gomer, according to Hitchcock's Bible Names Dictionary, it means to finish or complete. Now, according to Smith's Bible Dictionary, Gomer means perfect, aka complete, and is defined as the eldest son of Japheth, according to Genesis chapter 10, verses 2 and 3, the progenitor of the early Sumerians, of the later Cimbri, and the other branches of the Celtic family, and of the modern Gael and Cymri. So, according to Smith, the Gomerites are essentially the people the Romans usually referred to as barbarians. These are the various Germanic tribes that often clashed and at certain times collaborated with the Greco-Romans. So, do we have biblical proof to substantiate Smith's claims? Let's take a look. These are the sons of Gomer: Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. So the prophet Ezekiel spoke of the great judgment of the Japhetic nations who would be led by Gog and Magog at the end of the millennial reign. This is detailed in Ezekiel chapter 38. And this war is also mentioned in the book of Revelations in chapter 20. So pay attention, however, to verse 6 here. This is Gomer mustering his troops to battle. Let's see what it says. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands and many people with thee. The house of Togarmah of the north quarters. Let's look at that in multiple translations to get some clarity. Let me draw your attention to the English Standard Version translation of this verse. All right. So in the ESV, it reads, Gomer and all his hordes bet Togarmah from the uttermost parts of the north with all his hordes. Many peoples are with you. Let's get a look at this phrase in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it's Yarkete Sarpon, which in this context clearly means extreme north or far north. So the house of Togarmah of the Gomerites will come from the extreme north. Now let's look at Celtic migration patterns throughout the centuries. The Celtic people, Celt, also spelled Celt, Latin Celta, plural Celte, a member of an early Indo-European people who from the second millennium BCE to the first century BCE spread over much of Europe. Their tribes and groups eventually ranged from the British Isles in northern Spain to as far east as Transylvania, the Black Sea coast, Galatia in Anatolia, Turkey, and were part absorbed into the Roman Empire as Britons, Gauls, Boii, Galatians, and Celtiberians. Linguistically, they survive in the modern Celtic speakers of Ireland, Highland, Scotland, the Isles of Man, Wales, and Brittany. The source on this is Britannica.com. I've attached it right to this slide. And here is what those migratory patterns look like on a map. Notice how the Celts settled in the far north, particularly in the British Isles. You see, this is where the house of Togarmah will come to wage war on Israel at the end of the millennial kingdom. Historical research lines up with the idea that this is the house of Togarmah. Okay? Notice also that the Celts are considered Indo-Europeans, just like the Greeks, whom we have proven come from Javan, and just like the Persians, whom we have proven come from Madai, Japhetic people. So here's the point of all this. See, a lot of our people have embraced their biblical identity, and that's wonderful. That is the prophecy of Deuteronomy chapter 30 being fulfilled, and it is absolutely a miracle to behold. However, a lot of our people are also embracing folly along with that revelation. Notably, this silly notion that white Europeans are Esau or space aliens or Horite Nephilim or any of this other unbiblical nonsense. Europeans come from Japheth according to the word. Let's just leave it at that and move on. You see, I recognize that the European nations have visited many evils upon the world, and specifically upon our people. However, that does not justify these lame attempts at dehumanization that I see a lot of brews engaging in. A quick history lesson. It was the Hamitic Egyptians who ordered that our male children be slaughtered in the book of Exodus chapter 1, starting around verse 16. It was the Shemitic Assyrians who flayed our people alive for their own amusement. Interestingly enough, I don't see the same level of energy being directed toward condemning those groups. See, the Europeans are simply the latest in a long line of oppressors. We don't need to dehumanize them or cook up some crazy explanation of their origins to try to explain how or why their skin is light. Please, knock it off. It's really not that deep, and it's really not necessary. As it is written, tribulation and anguish upon every soul of man that doeth evil, of the Yehudi first, and also of the Gentile. But glory, honor, and peace to every man that worketh good, to the Yehudi first, and also to the Gentile. For there is no respect of persons with Elohim. It's time to purge out all the leaven, Israel. See, embracing deceit makes you appear unlearned in the scriptures. Most importantly, desire the sincere milk of the word so that you can grow in understanding and avoid speaking idle words and foolishness. See, once upon a time, all the children of Noah were a family, and it will be so again. According to the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 14, Israel will rule over the nations. Those who have taken us captive will become our captives, and we will rule over our oppressors. However, we will do so in righteousness. And it's time to prepare ourselves for that level of rulership, Israel. And that means becoming a proper example to the other nations. Be an example of grace and mercy, just like our Uncle Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his own brothers and later forgave and provided for them. Endeavor to be kind. In doing this, you will heap hot coals on the heads of our enemies. Think on that very important proverb in this hour. As always, I thank you for your time, family. I hope this has been enlightening for you, and I hope you have a stronger biblical understanding of the origins of the European nations. If you feel moved to make a free will offering to support my ministry, I've attached a link in the description of this video. Prayers and blessings are always appreciated above money, and I pray that the Spirit of the Most High Yah will lead you into all truth. All praises to the Most High Yah and great glory to Yehoshua HaMashiach, King of Kings. See you in the next video, family. Shalom.